What's this? The moon of Halloween night has not yet risen, Jack. What are we doing here? Well, I'm glad you asked. It is true that it isn't Halloween yet, but the tale I have chosen to tell for this season requires a proper setup. With the moon of that night slowly coming, I've decided to tell you about how demons were summoned to our world and how one swordsman cleaved his way through all of them. I still haven't dabbled as much into the Castlevania series as I would have liked at this point, but I can tell it has a legacy under its belt, because of how many games seem to be getting collections on modern consoles, and how many indie games try to carry on the gameplay style it left behind, especially the style of the Metroidvania titles like Symphony of the Night. But Koji Igarashi, Soten's director, wanted to keep everything about it from gameplay to spirit alive through any means he could, which became harder to do once he opted to leave Konami in 2014. At the time, Mighty No. 9's Kickstarter was doing well thanks to people's desire for Mega Man to return, so Igarashi got the idea that maybe he could revive the spirit of Castlevania and bring the ideas he's always had to life through this method. So, the Kickstarter for a game called Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was created. I'll continue that story once Halloween comes, but one of the stretch goals was an 8-bit style prequel game that would appeal more to people who are fonder of classic Castlevania, stage by stage, emphasis on the challenges ahead, all that stuff. So they got Inti Creates on board, and then the prequel game ended up as Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. And even without considering Ritual of the Night, Curse of the Moon did get a sizable following for continuing what people liked about classic Castlevania titles, and for just being a fun game entirely. And that brings us to how I feel about the game. So, shall we begin? There really isn't much to cover in this game in regards to story, aside from the setup and some small bits of character interaction. In a nutshell, there's a swordsman named Zangetsu, who was cursed not long ago, so he makes it his mission to kill every demon he can, and sets forth to this giant castle to take a great demon down. And that's pretty much it. I mean, sure, there is recruiting new allies, and seeing that Zangetsu has a really sharp tongue and a hatred towards sharp binders, and the endings to consider, but it doesn't go beyond just going through all opposition with what characters you have, even when they do add a different stake than previously. So most of the emphasis went to the gameplay, and I think you can tell just by looking at this footage that this really is an adaptation of classic Castlevania. While it does make a few changes to keep itself with modern conventions, like more comfortable ground control, being able to jump on stairs, and another thing I'll cover in a bit, the Belmont jump and most unfortunately, knockback are still here. Since you can't influence your jump in midair, preparing for enemies that might spawn or are already placed in weird places is crucial. However, if you aren't fond of knockback, and I honestly wouldn't blame you if you weren't, there is a workaround. When you select a game file, you can play the game in veteran mode, which is what I explained earlier, knockback and all, or casual mode, which gives you infinite lives, makes big health and big weapon ammo pickups more common, and removes knockback. I mean, lives in general aren't too taxing to find, as the point system does give you for reaching milestones, and there aren't too many egregious examples of knockback aside from a select few parts, but personally speaking, I think lives and knockback are really outdated game mechanics, and I much prefer not having them around. But I do believe that there are some people out there who value those things out of these kinds of games, or just want to challenge through any means. So kudos to this game for actually letting you choose. You still have the Belmont jump though, so you still need to be careful, but if you can get your head around it, you should be fine since the levels don't get too ridiculous. There's plenty of challenges at every screen, but they do feel like they're designed with the control scheme in mind, and despite the linearity with there being one start and one end, there are plenty of alternate paths to discover and find secrets like extra lives or upgrades that can permanently extend your health, weapon ammo that's used for sub-weapons, attack power, or defensive capability. Though they do stand strong on their own merit, if you are familiar with the classic Castlevania style, then there's plenty of nods I think you'll like. Heck, there's a part in this level that's just straight up that hallway from Castlevania 1. Zangetsu's ground speed is overall comfortable, his sword can be swung very quickly, though it doesn't reach out too far, and he's got sub-weapons to even the odds. I'm mostly a fan of his firebomb because of how much damage he can rack up in a short amount of time, but since it explodes on the ground, it might not be ideal for some enemies. The Bull and Chain and Demon Aura are good too though. At base level, Zangetsu isn't massively special, but thanks to his high amount of health and the practicality of some of his attributes, he is handy when he needs to be, albeit better for some challenges than others. But you might have picked up my comment about recruiting more allies, so let's talk about that in terms of gameplay. After the first 3 stages, you save a soul trapped inside the boss of that level who can actually join you, meaning you've got a grand total of 4 characters to choose from for this adventure. Each one brings their own way of playing the game by providing different ways to get around, like what I expect extra playable characters to do. Miriam is the closest playable character you're going to get to a Belmont in this game, having a whip with great range, a high jump, a slide which can get you through tight spaces, and sub-weapons which are immensely practical. My favorite in particular being the triple knives just because of how much coverage they have, although the axe is great too. Weirdly enough, Miriam is my favorite character to play as in this game. She goes down easier than Zangetsu does, sure, but I think she handles a lot of the game's challenges the best. Her slide does make accessing some secrets a cinch, and her sub-weapons can help out a lot of boss fights. Alfred is probably the most situational character out of the bunch. Except for his duplication spell, all of his magical sub-weapons are amazing. The fire shield is really useful, it's satisfying to freeze things with an ice spell before insta-killing them, and the electrical orbs pretty much make boss fights go into easy mode. Like, you don't need to do anything with these things out, it's great. However, I compliment these because these are his gameplay style. His physical attack is his sluggish, weak staff poke, and worst of all, he is incredibly fragile. This is why I barely use him unless I need an easy solution to a problem. His magic is a great solution, but since you share supplemental energy between every character, it's only wise to use it when the situation calls for it. I like having him around, but he's no character to have out at all times. That just leaves Jeeble, who right off the bat has a great standard attack. These bat projectiles go straight up, so they're good for sniping foes that are within range above you, and at close range, they can act as a pseudo-substitute for Miriam's knives. He can also turn into a bat and fly wherever he wants to, which is lovely for accessing secrets or bypassing level parts you don't feel like playing. It devours sub-weapon energy like a bloodthirsty bat, but since Jeeble himself doesn't have sub-weapons, the purple lanterns then carry replacement energy, so you can fill it right back up. I said earlier that Zangetsu is better at certain challenges than others, because with these 4 characters, you can overcome every obstacle in the game your own way, and you have more freedom for strategy and boss encounters. This is why I recommend keeping every character alive if you're looking for everything, because if one of them dies, then they cannot be played as for the rest of the stage, or if every other character dies as well. And while you can continue on without them and beat the stage just fine, you might end up missing out on something that requires the character you no longer have. It's fine if you don't mind this, compounded by the fact that you don't lose life until your entire party is dead, and the fact that if you got characters left, you're sent back to the start of the room you died in, as opposed to getting sent back to the last checkpoint you crossed, like you would if you were to lose a life. But if you're a person with a knack for exploration, like me, then it's ideal to keep everyone alive. Another thing I like about the system is the fact that everyone has their own health bars, meaning you can use it to preserve someone who just took a beating, and get their health back up later on. Your party members can reasonably handle the bosses on their own, but it's clear that some are better choices than others, meaning a boss that might be tricky with most characters might be easy with Jeeble. Or you could use Alfred's electric orbs. I don't need to do anything! It's smart to keep this in mind as you go further, because on Nightmare and Ultimate mode, bosses attack faster, and have a few more surprises thrown in, meaning you gotta be on your toes when it comes to them. But that's all implying you recruit every other character and play the game the main way, because if you want to, you can completely ignore each member once you save them, or you can murder them on the spot and steal their soul.
What?
Yeah, you can kill them, and doing so will actually grant Zangetsu a brand new ability. If he kills all the other characters, he can get a better aerial attack, a dash, and even a double jump. Sure, you might not be able to explore as much, but with these added abilities, you might find going along the normal paths to be just as engaging, and Zangetsu in general becomes so much more fun to play as. I love going as fast as I can, and blowing past whatever opposition there is. It was also cool to see that doing this unlocked the game's Ultimate mode, where I get to keep the souped up Zangetsu with a Charge Slash, which is amazing against bosses, and still get to recruit other characters. If I'm going back to this, I'm definitely going to be playing this mode, as well it can put up more of a fight than the normal mode, and I might not be able to fight against a certain boss that you can only fight in Nightmare mode. It's still just fun with the amount of freedom you have. Bloodstained Curse of the Moon isn't a game I come back to ridiculously often, but it managed to adapt a lot of the staples from the series it's clearly taking inspiration from into the modern day, while still being an enjoyable game in its own way. I really do get a kick out of how this game looks, paying tribute to a lot of NES titles, while still looking vibrant and detailed, yet not overly cartoony all the same. The music's great to listen to as well, and overall, I'd say it's an easy platformer to sink your teeth into, because it isn't overly demanding. If you tried out an older Castlevania title and couldn't get into it because of the stiffness or the difficulty or whatever, you might find what you're looking for with Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. It doesn't require a ton out of you, and it manages to get your attention well from the beginning before testing and thrilling you later on. It's a good platformer to have, and I'd say it does what it sets out to do very well. And that following proved to be effective because 2 years later, we'd see a follow-up. And I am happy they decided to do this, because even though Curse of the Moon 1 was a stretch goal that would pave way for Ritual of the Night, it shows that this kind of game still has an audience. So what does Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2 have to offer? Simply put, more of what made the first game good, with a lot of new twists to spice things up. Some really work, and some... well, I wouldn't say not work, but... okay, let's just go. The story is once again Zangetsu teaming up with others to slay demons, though I'm not sure of the continuity we're basing this game off of. So according to the opening, Zangetsu, Miriam, Alfred, and Jeeble were successful in quelling the Great Demon from last time, and successful in their escape, something that does not happen in the first game at all. In the best ending, which you get by recruiting everyone, beating the Great Demon, and then beating Nightmare Mode, Zangetsu dies and gets sent somewhere into the future, right on top of the skyscraper from Mega Man 2. But in the other endings, at least one of the other friends dies, so what gives? I know they're playing the alternate timeline thing for these two and Ritual of the Night, but it feels like they're jumping the gun. But whatever, fine, anything to get me to the action. I will say though, I do appreciate the additional character dynamics. Even if some of it is done within these animations in between stages, it does contribute something. Zangetsu's tongue is far less sharp than it was previously, and he has some pretty humorous and admittedly nice conversations with all the new characters. A local church exorcist Dominique, his old friend Robert, and Hachi, a corgi and a mech. Okay, side note, the fact that there's a corgi and a mech in this game is an automatic 10 out of 10 from me. So that's about it, let's get down to business. Zangetsu starts off similar to last time, but after stage 4, you'll get a new sword that gives you a better aerial attack, a 3-hit combo, and stronger sub-weapons, which are awesome. But sadly, if you want the good ending of the second episode, you'll have to give up the sword in favor of one that isn't as good. But regardless, he's still fine. But as I said, he's got some new friends at his side. Dominique is a sort of mix between a supporter and a long-range attacker. Her spear has great range, she can aim it upwards to snipe aerial threats, and she can ducktails. Her supplements are immensely handy in reaching enemies that are in rather inconvenient spots, and she has this one-use spell that heals party members and revives any that are dead, which is massively convenient. Dominique overall helps in many awkward situations, and it's fun working your way around certain levels that would be harder for a certain character, so she's absolutely welcome. Robert's got a gun, so he naturally has the most reach out of any character in the game. This would make him satisfying to use, but it gets better when he can get into a crouching position to take out enemies in tight spots, and his supplements pack a mighty punch. The bandana in particular basically lets him go John Rambo and shoot 2 guns, and proper use of that one snaps bosses like a twig. He can also wall jump. Just be wary of when you do all of this, because he is incredibly fragile. Even with health pickups and defensive pickups, it doesn't take that much to kill him. In some cases, enemies can drain his health just like that. It's for this reason why I mostly use him for sniping enemies in weird places, rather than full-on normal traversal or boss encounters, unless I know I can get away with it. He's still great, just don't get cocky. But then we get to Hachi, who is probably my favorite character to play as out of any of these games. I did say earlier that a corgi and a mech was a 10 out of 10, especially considering when he crouch walks, his mech turns into a full-on train. But more seriously speaking, Hachi has the most health out of anyone in the game. He's immune to some hazards like spikes. His punch and ground pound overall pack immense damage, making him ideal for chunkier opponents. He has a hover to help him out with platforming, and at the cost of some weapon energy, he gets full-on invincibility that eats up smaller enemies like popcorn. Since Hachi doesn't have sub-weapons like Jeeble, Purple Lanterns carry weapon energy instead of sub-weapons, so the fact that the invincibility goes through it like crazy can be circumvented unless you get careless. Hachi's not only a lot of fun to play as, in my opinion, but his abilities do make a lot of what the game throws at you a lot more comfortable. Like, if I'm not confident in certain jumps, I can rely on his hover to guide me, and the invincibility when I was in a tough spot or a demanding puzzle was a lifesaver. Like last time, each level does have challenges that are easier to overcome with some characters than others, and there's specific parts that carry permanent upgrades, which is a good reward for going off the beaten path and keeping everyone alive. There are certain aspects returning, like everyone having their own health, not losing life until all characters are dead, and veteran and casual modes working the same way. But the levels do stand out with more challenging gimmicks and tougher opponents, which I welcome. Heck, if you're a sucker for challenge, you can play the game on Legend mode, which makes enemies hit harder, and makes it so if one character dies, you lose a life and get sent back. It's there if you want to try it, but as for me, no thanks, I'm good. Graphically, it doesn't go beyond what the first game did, but since the first game already looked great, everything I said there applies here. But I do think it took a step forward in the sound department. This game's soundtrack makes me want to dance. The beats are hypnotically catchy, and the notes that are used are perfect for the vibe they have going. Not to say the first game had bad music, no, quite the opposite. But 2's is just delicious. Honestly, it'd be for the best if I let you listen to some of my personal favorite pieces. So okay, this game seems pretty fun so far. Everything good was kept intact, new additions are welcome, new difficulties welcome. Where does the complication come in? Right when we get to separate episodes. I should say the Nightmare mode from the first game was also in episode 2 of sorts, since it did continue the story from the center campaign when you recruit everyone, but that was the only time something like this happened. Here, it's amplified. Unlike last time where each mode and each way to play the game was its own thing, barring Nightmare mode to a degree, each of this game's episodes follow up on one another in terms of plot. After Dominique is put out of commission at the end of episode 1, episode 2 is spent trying to get her back, while maybe getting the story needed to get the game's good ending. Which doesn't matter all that much, considering if you get the bad ending, you basically have to play the game again via the next one in order to get yourself back on track, and both of these processes lead you to the same final episode, and judging by the fact that each one has the same stages, you can kinda see where the problem is. Granted, it is still fun to find alternate paths in earlier stages with previously inaccessible characters, but unfortunately in episode 2's case, that amount really isn't that high, and there's still a ton you cannot access with their loadouts, which does hamper the experience a bit. What really hampers things are the bosses. In episode 2 and beyond, I'm sorry, I did not have much fun with these. It doesn't feel like they were properly attuned with how Zangetsu, Robert, and Hachi handle, since the way they attack and the amount of ground hazards limits approach options in a game with a lot of attack variety, but few approach options given the Belmont jump. It kind of feels like I'm more so using Hachi's invincibility, or following really obtuse instructions, and I feel like they went with it to attune with the design of the final episode, rather than a mode with only these three. Now, the final episode lets you pick any stage in any order you want to, and lets you choose your character recruitment order while you're at it, which also includes your friends to the first game, meaning you could play the game with 7 characters. The fact that you have total freedom for progression would be cool, were it not for the fact that the difficulty from episode 2 remains intact, and you need to recollect your equipment, meaning if you select a late game stage with your default self, be prepared to die. A lot. And I guess you could just replay the stages again in the normal order, but not only does that reinforce the repetition and shoot the purpose of the episode in the foot, but doing that has 2 big snags. Firstly, you can only keep a character once you beat the stage they're linked to, but which character you get from what stage is randomized. Yes, I tested this. At the start of each file for the final episode, the game ejects each character except Zangetsu into one of 7 stages, so if there's a character you really want to get above all else, there's a chance they might be in one that'll be miserable to go through with your loadout. This wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the other snag. Certain upgrades only be accessible with certain characters comes in to bite you here. If you don't have a character who can reach one, there's going to be some backtracking involved in order to get it. Thankfully, when you get an upgrade, you have it for good and you can leave the stage. And I don't think they're too taxing to find, aside from a select few like going through a wall, but my problem is how many replays it takes. Under most circumstances, even with every character available, it is impossible to get every collectible a stage has in one go, with certain points where it's also impossible to go back. So in the final episode, you'll probably have to replay stages at least twice in order to get everything, maybe more depending on how you went about things, and that's on top of the 2 previous episodes, the 4th one which I don't understand the inclusion of, and the fact that getting the good ending of episode 2 and being the final episode doesn't unlock it, meaning that's another replay. So if you're not catching my drift, regardless of what Zangetsu you have, because yes, you can choose this playstyle once you beat the main story, which is cool by the way, if you get episode 2's bad ending the first time, and if the final episode you decide to revisit stages in order to get every collectible, you will need to replay every stage a total of 5 times in order to get everything. And if you get episode 2's good ending the first time, like I did, because episode EX only unlocks when you get the bad ending, and both it and episode 2's good ending have the same goal point, that's 6 playthroughs you have to do! I'm sorry, but that's just draining. This is why I fully admit I didn't get episode 2's bad ending and did do a playthrough of episode EX. I enjoy the levels, but after this amount of revisits, I just got burnt out. This is a linear action platformer, not an open world adventure game. This will eventually lose your attention. Now, granted, once you have all the characters, it can still be fun. Not to mention the finale you get from it is great, but just the sheer repetition from the structure honestly brings the game down for me by quite a few notches. Sure, the first game technically had you play it 4 times to see all of what it had to offer, but a playthrough on normal mode and nightmare mode are technically considered the main bulk of the story, with the soul ability playthrough, the ultimate mode, and anything beyond that being extras. Here, everything is part of the same campaign as each other, and what the game asks you to do is drowned in repetition, and that's my biggest gripe. Mechanically, I like Curse of the Moon 2 more for all the fun characters you can mess around with, and I do appreciate how it does try to do new things, rather than just be a refined first adventure, but it means less of my experience with the game past episode 1 was all over the place, thanks to how much the game recycles content for the sake of extension, and it's for that reason that I would probably return to the first game more. Sure, it doesn't have as much variety or interesting ideas, but the tight design, combined with how the original 4 handled, does immediately make Curse of the Moon 1 feel more fulfilling in my eyes. None of this is to say Curse of the Moon 2 is bad, not even close. If anything, it's still a fun time, and I do recommend that you check it out. I just don't see myself coming back to it as much. But in the end, both are still worth checking out regardless. If you've never touched a Castlevania game before, let alone a classic Castlevania game, if you just wanted some fun, retro-style 2D platforming action, or you just want to play something appropriate for Halloween, I would recommend picking these two up. They're really cheap on digital storefronts they appear on, so you're not breaking bank by getting them. So go on, slay some demons, and join the Hachi train. I'm the Lightning Ripper, and this is only the beginning of this year's Halloween solstice, and it shall give way to a ritual that will be performed when the time is right. So go on, and prepare yourself for that time, and I will see you back here soon.